Once again, this is Drama 203, Section 1, and today I'll be talking about another play by the great ancient Greek playwright Sophocles. Last week we looked at Oedipus the King. This week we'll be looking at Antigone. But before I begin my examination of Antigone, I want to say a few things about the political background to the Greek tragedies that we've been studying. In past weeks, I've talked about the theatrical conventions. I've also talked about the religious ideas that are given expression in these plays. Now I want to focus on the politics. Well, it's a very interesting fact that the theater in ancient Athens emerged under tyranny and flourished under democracy. In the 6th century BCE, a series of aristocrats took control of Athens and established themselves as absolute rulers, called tyrants, from the Greek word tyrannos. Pisistratus was among those tyrants. He reigned as absolute ruler of Athens between 546 and 527 BCE. He sought to develop more centralized civic ceremonies and institutions in order to bolster Athenian pride and to aggrandize himself and his regime. He was very much a populist tyrant, depending on the support of the common people of Athens. He had a son named Hippias, and his son Hippias succeeded him as tyrant of Athens. Hippias ruled from 527 to 510 BCE. He continued his father's policies, and he oversaw the very first city Dionysia festival. The historian John Hesk puts it this way: the Greek theater had its origins in authoritarian attempts to create a sense of belonging, to create collective cults through which the state could be imagined. Well, in 508 BCE, a turning point in the history of Athens and arguably the history of the world. Under the leadership of an aristocrat named Cleisthenes, the Athenians adopted a new constitution, a constitution which made the polis of Athens a democracy, what many historians consider to be the world's first democracy. Now, there were many limitations to the democracy that the Athenians created, and we shouldn't idealize that state. As it grew in power, Athens became more imperialistic and more xenophobic. Its economy was partially dependent on slavery, and women had few rights. I'll discuss more about the status of women in 5th century BC Athens a bit later. For free adult males, however, Athens had a more direct and participatory form of democracy than we have in Canada. Cleisthenes created a council of 500 members, chosen each year by the drawing of lots. The council prepared business for the General Assembly. Every adult male citizen had to help run the city government, serving in the courts, military offices, and administrative posts. Every citizen was expected to give service to the state, and every major decision in Athens was put to a vote. Politicians who became unpopular could be banished for 10 years by a vote of the people. There were a great many public debates in Athens. Skill in rhetoric was highly valued, as was skill in oratory. Athenian citizens would vote on a given law or amendment only after speeches had been delivered on either side of the issue. So that was the backdrop for the Greek tragedies by Aeschylus, by Sophocles, by Euripides, as well as the Greek comedies by Aristophanes. The scholar Philip B. Zarelli has written the following: Athenians expected their theater to stage contemporary cultural issues in a dialogic process, stirring debate. I want to quote another scholar before we get into Antigone, very influential and important scholar, a Parisian scholar who wrote a great many books on classic culture and ancient civilization, Jean-Pierre Vernant, who began his career in the 1940s, continued writing right up until his death in 2007. And his main argument is that the form and content of Greek tragedies of 5th century BCE emerged out of the tension between, on the one hand, the legal and political thought of Athenian democracy, and on the other hand, inherited mythical and heroic traditions. That tension, Bernard goes on to say, and I most certainly agree with him, that tension is made evident on stage every time the individual protagonist engages in dialogue with the chorus. Remember, the chorus represents the collective, the community. In those dialogues, as we've seen in Agamemnon and Oedipus the King, there is a great deal of questioning and a great deal of debate. So the larger point I'm making is this, that debate was at the core of the political culture of Athens during this time period, and likewise, debate is at the very core of these plays that we've been studying. Well, with that, let's turn to Antigone. So this play is found on page 141 of the Norton Anthology of Drama, Volume 1. So please turn to that page in the text. Robert Fagles is not our translator this time. Our translator is Robert Bagg. And this is a play written by Sophocles, probably in 441 BCE. So he wrote Antigone 11 years before he wrote and first staged Oedipus the King. However, Antigone takes place after the events of the Oedipus play, and that's my reasoning for why I sequenced the plays as I have on our syllabus. So let's get into episode number 1. As usual, I will be quoting the line numbers rather than the page numbers. So with your Norton in front of you, let's turn to episode number 1, which consists of lines 1 to 120, followed by Stasimund number 1, the choral song, lines 121 to 184. So this play begins with two female characters, the daughters of King Oedipus and Jocasta, the princesses Antigone and Ismene. Through their dialogue, Sophocles presents exposition. I've talked about exposition in recent classes, the relation of essential prior matters, telling the playgoer what the playgoer needs to know to understand the story that is about to unfold on the stage, the background information. And from this exposition, we find out what has happened in Thebes and in the royal house of Thebes following Oedipus's self-exile and eventual death. His sons are briefly mentioned in Oedipus the King. And remember, Oedipus is more focused on his two daughters and what will become of them. But he has these two sons, Autolycus and Polynices. And after their father was revealed to be the cause of the plague in Thebes, and he exiled himself after blinding himself, Autolycus and Polynices, both grown men at that point, fought over the throne of Thebes. Autolycus took control of the city, and Polynices allied himself with the king of Argos, another Greek city-state. We're familiar with that state. It is the city-state that Agamemnon would one day rule. Well, with an army led by 7 legendary Argive warriors, Polynices attacked Thebes. In the battle that followed, Polynices' army was defeated, and both of Oedipus's sons, Autolycus and Polynices, died in battle. This story is told in a play by Aeschylus, 7 Against Thebes. Well, after the death of both Autolycus and Polynices, Creon, remember Creon? Creon is, of course, Jocasta's brother, Oedipus's brother-in-law, I suppose also Oedipus's uncle. Creon became king of Thebes. And his first decision was to forbid the burial of the corpse of Polynices, who had led foreign soldiers against his own city. And this decision has Antigone, the present play's main character, in a state of anguish and rage. Let's go to that first lengthy speech by Antigone, picking it up at line 27. So line 27 in our text. Antigone tells her sister, It's Creon. The way he's treated our brothers. Hasn't he buried one with honor, but he shamed the other, disgraced him. Autolycus, they say, was laid to rest according to law and custom. The dead will respect him in Hades. Hades, remember, the underworld, the afterlife in the ancient Greek religion. The dead will respect him in Hades, but Polynices' sorry body can't be touched. The city is forbidden to mourn him or bury him. No tombs, no tears, convenient forage for cruising birds to feast their fill. That's the clear order our good general gives you and me. Yes, I said me. They say he's coming here to proclaim it in person to those who haven't heard it. This is not something he takes lightly. Violate any provision, the sentence is you're stoned to death in your own city. Lines 27 to 43. Antigone, we soon learn, has decided to take it upon herself to bury her fallen brother Polynices. At line 55, she declares, I won't betray him. I won't betray him, even if it means, as her sister Ismene is quick to point out, breaking the law and facing a public stoning. Ismene's explanation for why she rejects Antigone's plan is very revealing. Line 75, this is Ismene speaking. She says to Antigone, remember, we are women. How can we fight them? They're stronger. We must accept these things, and worse to come. Women in Sophocles' Athens were not considered full citizens. They couldn't vote, hold office, make contracts, incur debts, bring actions of law, inherit property, or take dramatic roles. So in the original production of Antigone, back in 441 BCE, it would be male actors performing the roles of Antigone and her sister Ismene. Will Durant, he is one of my favorite historians. I've been reading him for years, and he wrote a collection of books on ancient civilizations, and his volume on ancient Greece is well worth reading. Will Durant writes that in 5th century BCE Athens, men came to judge women in terms of utility and found them especially useful in the home. She could, if properly veiled and attended, visit her relatives or intimates, and could take part in the religious celebrations, including attendance at plays. But for the rest, she was expected to stay at home and could not allow herself to be seen at a window. Most of her life was spent in the women's quarters at the rear of the house. No male visitor was ever admitted there, nor could she appear when men visited her husband. Her education was confined to the household arts. That is from Will Durant and his examination of ancient Greece. Durant goes on to point out that one of the major duties assigned to Athenian women of this era was to repair the bodies of the dead and to ensure the dead had all the sacred rites performed in the correct order. In this play, Antigone angrily scolds her reluctant sister. This is at line 93. Go ahead, please yourself, defy law the gods expect us to honor. Defy law the gods expect us to honor. So she's saying, this is my responsibility, this is my duty, now that my mother is gone. I must ensure that the sacred rites are performed in the correct order on the corpse of my brother Polynices. That is what the gods tell us to do. Ismene's interpretation of her sister's plan to bury their brother Polynices, well, look at line number 81. She says, it's crazy to attempt the impossible. Line 106, she says to Antigone, you're burning to do what should stop you cold. You love fights you can't win. So at this point, I want to introduce another important literary term that is relevant to the stories that are told in plays, as well as the stories in novels and short stories and narrative poems. And that term is foil. Foil. A foil is a character in a work of literature who, by sharp contrast, serves to stress and highlight the distinctive personality of the protagonist, the lead character. One of the most famous foils in all of literature, Dr. John Watson in Sherlock Holmes. He's not only the sidekick, he's the foil. His personality highlights what is so unique and distinct about the main character, Sherlock Holmes. In Star Trek, one of my all-time favorite series, actually it is my all-time favorite series, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, I think, serve as the foil to each other. Go back to Hamlet, the tragedy of Hamlet by William Shakespeare. Horatio is the foil to Prince Hamlet, as Hamlet himself points out in that play. So, foil. That term is very much relevant to this play, to Sophocles' Antigone, because as we see in this opening episode, Ismene is very much the foil to her sister Antigone. Notice that Ismene is aware of the wrongness of Creon's ruling, but she believes there's nothing she can do about it. Line 78. I want the spirits of the dead to understand this, says Ismene. I am not free. I must obey whoever is in charge. Ismene sees herself as practical, sober-minded, and rational. She's genuinely afraid for her sister, but she believes, line 110, hopeless passion is wrong from the start, and that therefore Antigone, line number 118, is a fool. When they part, Antigone angrily tells her sister, this is at line 113, let me in my recklessness deal with this alone. No matter what I suffer, I won't die dishonored. Last week I talked about the Poetics by Aristotle. That was this treatise that the famous Greek philosopher wrote in 336 BCE, where he outlines, among other things, all the elements that he felt were essential to a tragic play, and we talked about some of them: anagnorisis, peripety, the scene of suffering. Well, I think we can add one more element that is found in almost every tragedy, that the protagonist of a tragedy finds himself or herself isolated from his or her family and from the larger community. Such is the case with Antigone in episode 1 of this play. She seeks help from her last living sibling, Ismene, and Ismene said, "You're a fool to do this," right? This is hopeless passion that is wrong from the start. You're always a lover of lost causes, and it's going to get you killed. So Antigone is very much alone at the end of this first episode. Well, let's turn to episode 2 of the play, which covers lines 185 to 363. And that episode is followed by a stasimon consisting of lines 364 to 411. In episode 2, Creon enters the stage. King Creon, we remember him from Oedipus the King. Now he is king of Thebes. And he gives his reasons for the order that Polynices' body remain unburied. So this is picking it up at line 219 in this very long speech by Creon. He says, I'll never think our country's enemy can be my friend. Keep this in mind, he says to the assembled chorus, representing the people of Thebes. Our country is the ship that must keep us safe. It's only on board her, among the men who sail her upright, that we make true friends. Such are the principles I will follow to preserve Thebes' greatness. So Creon sees himself above all else as a patriot. He believes that everything he does is for the good of Thebes. And what he perceives as the common good is the only good that matters. He continues, this is picking it up at line 225. Akin to these are my explicit orders concerning Oedipus's sons. Autolycus, who died fighting for our city and who excelled in combat, will be given the rituals and burial proper to the noble dead. But his brother, I mean Polynices, who returned from exile, utterly determined to burn down his own city, incinerate the gods we worship, revel in kinsmen's blood, enslave everyone left alive. As for him, It is now a crime for Thebans to bury him or mourn him. Dogs and birds will savage and outrage his corpse, an ugly and a visible disgrace. That is my thinking. And I will never tolerate giving a bad man more respect than a good one. Only those faithful to Thebes will I honor in this life and after death. Lines 225 to 243. So, according to Creon's thinking, Polynices wronged the state. And since the state is what's all important, Polynices must be punished, even in death. He's made himself a non-person. Creon, moreover, is utterly certain that the gods, specifically Zeus, the head god, the all-father, god of thunder in the skies, that the gods are on his side, on Creon's side. This is at line 334. He says, "You who worship Zeus, since Zeus enforces his own will through mine, be sure of this. This edict I've made regarding the body of Polynices, it is my solemn oath." So Creon sees himself as Zeus's representative on earth, Zeus's instrument on earth. Zeus rules the Theban people through his surrogate, Creon, and therefore Creon can't possibly be wrong about anything. Well, this is a dark, tragic play, but in the second episode we get some unexpected humor. Humor in the form of the bumbling, very talkative guard whose main concern is avoiding blame for the burial of Polynices. So let's look at line 257. This is the passage in episode 2 of Antigone. And this guard takes the stage and delivers the news to Creon that Creon doesn't want to hear. So on page 148, and this is line 157, enter guard, he tends to mime the actions he describes. Guard: "I didn't run here at such a breakneck pace, King, that I'm winded. Pausing to think stopped me, wheeled me around, headed me back more than once. My mind kept yelling at me, reckless fool, why go where you'll be punished? Then, lazy clod, dawdling are you? What if Creon hears this news from somebody else? You'll pay for it. I made myself dizzy, hurrying slowly, stretching out a short road. I finally realized I had to come. If I'm talking annihilation here, I'll still say it, since I'm of the opinion nothing but my own fate can cause me harm." And Creon is growing increasingly enraged and increasingly curious. "What's making you so agitated?" The guard replies, "I've got to explain my role in this matter. I didn't do it. I didn't see who did. So it wouldn't be right to punish me." And Creon, is obviously wanting to hear this news, good or bad. "You're obsessed with protecting yourself. That's a nice fortified wall you've thrown up around your news, which must be odd indeed." "You bet," says the guard, "and bad news must be broken slowly." Creon interjects, "Why not just tell it? Then you can vanish." "But I am telling you," says the guard. "That corpse, someone's buried it and run off. They sprinkled thirsty dust on it, then did all the rituals." And Creon is astonished. "What are you saying? What man would dare do this?" The guard: "I've no idea. No marks from a pickaxe, no dirt thrown up by a shovel. The ground's all hard and dry, unbroken, no wheel ruts. Whoever did this left no trace. When the man on dawn watch showed it to us, we all got a nasty surprise. The dead man had dropped out of sight. He wasn't entombed, but dusted over, as though someone had tried to stave off defilement. There was no sign dogs or wild animals had chewed the corpse. Then we all started yelling rough words, threats, blaming each other. Every guard ready to throw punches, nobody to stop us. Every man under suspicion, but none of us convicted. We all denied it, swearing to God we'd handle red-hot iron or walk through fire to back up our oaths. After interrogation got us nowhere, one man spoke up and made us hang our heads toward the ground in terror. We couldn't do what he said or avoid trouble if we did. He advised us to tell you what happened, not try to hide it. That seemed our best move, so we drew lots to choose the messenger. I lost. I'm no happier to be here than you are to see me. Don't I know that? Nobody loves the man who brings bad news. So it's some comedy from a comical character. And this is another device that I wanted to bring to your attention today that we'll see used by dramatists throughout the historical periods that we'll be examining, not just ancient Greece. Comedy relief. Comic scenes and characters in a serious work of literature. That's what comedy relief is. And comedy relief is very often used to alleviate tension in a story, as well as to add variety. And here we have this very dark, tragic play, Antigone, but we have this moment of comedy relief, thanks to the bumbling, talkative guard, who understandably doesn't want to be blamed for what has happened, the burial of Polynices. Well, let's move on then to episode 3, lines 414 to 627, followed by Stasimon 3, lines 628 to 691. And this, to me, is the single most important episode in the entire play. It is at the heart of what this play is all about. As we go into episode 3, there's the Stasimon that ends episode 2. And in that Stasimon, the chorus seems to endorse Creon's position. In the Stasimon that ends episode 2, the chorus sings that those who defy the state's laws are, line 409, reckless and corrupt. Then when we move into episode 3, when Antigone is brought on stage by the guard and she comes face to face with her uncle, her antagonist in this story, Creon, the leader of the chorus calls her actions, line 421, a thoughtless act. Antigone has been caught covering up the dead body of Polynices, and it's revealed this is the second time she's done so. The guard, the same guard from the previous episode, describes her visceral response to the exposed body. You know, the guards see her from afar, then they move in to arrest her. This is at line 465, line 465 to line 477. Read along with me. When she saw the body stripped naked, she wailed one more time, then yelled a string of curses at those who'd done it. She scooped up powdery dust, and from a graceful bronze urn poured out 3 cool swallows for the dead. Soon as we saw this, we moved in to stop her. She wasn't a bit shocked when we charged her with the earlier crime, and now this one. Didn't deny a thing. That pleased, but also troubled me, says the guard. Escaping blame oneself is always a relief. Still, it hurts to cause your own people grief. But all that matters much less to me than my own safety. So the guard's description allows for a very human moment from this secondary character. The guard says he's relieved to be off the hook. Creon threatened him with death if he didn't find the culprit. But he feels bad for Antigone. Antigone, who he describes as one of his own people. And I've mentioned in the last class when we looked at Oedipus the King that one of the great legacies of Sophocles, for which he was loved and respected by the playwrights who followed him in the centuries since he composed his plays, is his gift with characterization, right? And I think that is evident throughout Oedipus the King. It is evident here as well. A guard, this seemingly a throwaway character, not a main character, but he's given these memorable lines, and in those few lines he's given a personality, and he's given dimensions. We can see where he's coming from. Well, this all leads into the exchange between Creon and Antigone. And in that exchange, Antigone defends her actions in one of the most famous speeches in all of dramatic literature. This is at line 483. So let's turn to line 483. This is on page 153 of our text. And Creon at line 41, sends the guard away. You're excused from this grim business. You're now free to go anywhere you please. I won't kill you after all, because we did find the culprit. The guard exits the stage, exits the orchestra, and then he turns to Antigone, his niece. Explain something to me without elaborating. Were you aware of my decree forbidding this? Antigone responds, of course I knew. We all knew. Creon, and still you dared to violate the law? And here it is, Antigone's key speech. She says, I did. It wasn't Zeus who issued me this order, and justice, who lives below, was not involved. They'd never condone it. I deny that your edicts, since you, a mere man, imposed them, have the force to trample on the gods' unwritten and infallible laws. Their laws are not ephemeral. They weren't made yesterday, and they will last forever. No man knows how far back in time they go. I'd never let any man's arrogance bully me into breaking the gods' laws. I'll die someday. How could I not know that? I knew it without your proclamation. If I do die young, that's an advantage, for doesn't a person like me, who lives besieged by trouble, escape by dying? My own death isn't going to bother me, but I would be devastated to see my mother's son die and rot unburied. I've no regrets for what I've done, and if you consider my acts foolhardy, I say, look at the fool charging me with folly. Antigone to her uncle, to her now enemy, King Creon. So Antigone is certain that moral religious laws are more significant, more meaningful than human laws, the laws of the state. Antigone seems to have no regrets. Later in this episode, she says to her sister, this is at line 604, gather your strength, Ismene. Your life goes on. Long ago, I dedicated mine to the dead. In a very influential reading of this play, the 19th century German philosopher George Wilhelm Hegel made the following argument. It's an argument that is summarized in an introduction to our version of the play. And Hegel's argument goes as follows. Both Antigone and Creon, quoting Hegel, were wrong because they were one-sided. But at the same time, both were right. In Hegel's words, the play is a collision between the two highest moral powers. Antigone is defending religious law, while Creon is upholding civic law. Each is doing his or her duty. That's Hegel's take on this play. And as I say, it's a very influential play, influential interpretation. I think in any edition of the play, including our own, you'll see this interpretation spelled out by the editor, by the writer of the introduction. And I think there's something to be said about Hegel's reading of Antigone, but I don't necessarily agree with the interpretation in its entirety. Because once Antigone is captured for attempting to perform the burial rituals on the body of her brother Polynices, once she's captured, Creon begins to act like a tyrant. Again, a tyrant is a ruler who uses intimidation and force, a ruler who ignores and twists the existing laws to his own ends. Moreover, Creon seems in large part motivated by his misogyny. This is at line 521, still in the same episode. At line 521, Creon exclaims, there is no doubt that if she emerges victorious and is never punished, I am no man. She will be the man here. So I think something that Hegel overlooks in his analysis of the play is that gender is a major issue in the action of Sophocles' Antigone. Gender. And we see it here. Creon is especially upset that a woman, a non-citizen, has stood up to him. In the next speech, he declares, this is at line 527, she, Antigone, and her sister still must die. So he condemns Ismene even though there is no evidence against her. In all his statements in this episode, his profound hatred for Antigone is apparent. He says to her, this is at line 569, 569 to 570, "Love your dead brothers. While I'm alive, no woman governs me." And when Ismene reminds Creon that Antigone is not just his niece, but his future daughter-in-law, because she is betrothed to Creon's son Haman, Creon offers a crude retort at line 615. Oh yes, he'll find other fields to plow. So to Creon, women are interchangeable. In the next stasimon, the chorus, which remember in Sophocles' plays and Aeschylus's plays represents, seemingly, the view of the larger community, the chorus is apparently entirely unsympathetic to Antigone. This is at line 684 and continuing to line 691. "The man was wise who said these words, evil seems noble, early and late, to minds unbalanced by the gods, but only for a moment will such men hold off catastrophe." So the chorus, as I say, seems to be against Antigone and siding with Creon. Antigone, however, argues that this isn't the case. This is, going back a few lines, line 545, 545 to 548. And these are Antigone's words to Creon. She said, "These men," the chorus, "these men here would approve my actions if fear didn't seal their lips. Tyranny is fortunate in many ways. It can, for instance, say and do anything it wants." Tyranny is fortunate in many ways. It can, for instance, say and do anything it wants. So, this, I think, of all the plays written by Sophocles, is his most political, and arguably the most political play written by any of the three great tragic playwrights of the 5th century BCE. And the point that Antigone is making here is probably a point that we can understand living in the world we do. In a typical authoritarian government, citizens can't say what they actually feel for fear of persecution. That was true in the tyrannies back in Sophocles' day. That is true in the authoritarian governments that exist in our world. Sophocles never makes clear if Antigone is correct that the chorus actually supports her. I think Sophocles allows us to decide on that plot point, but it's certainly the case, at least at this point, that Antigone believes she does have the support of the people. Well, episode 4, which runs from lines 692 to 860, centers on another face-to-face confrontation. This one is between King Creon and his son Haman, who loves Antigone. And initially, Haman seems to support his father's decision. This is at line 708. So just go to line 708. This is episode 4 of Sophocles' play. Here we have Haman, and he's being highly deferential to his father. He says, "I respect your wisdom. Show me the straight path and I'll take it. I couldn't value any marriage more than the excellent guidance you give me." These are the words of Haman. But as the conversation between father and son continues, Haman's words, it turns out, are all part of a strategy. His real goal is to convince Creon to spare Antigone. Look at line 766. He speaks more about how he believes the people of Thebes truly feel about this situation. "No one tells you what you'd rather not hear, but I hear, unobserved, what people think. Listen, Thebes aches for this girl. No person ever, they're saying, less deserved to die. No one's ever been so unjustly killed for actions as magnificent as hers. When her own brother died in that bloodbath, she kept him from lying there unburied, fair game for flesh-eating dogs and vultures. Hasn't she earned, they ask, gold and honor? Those are the words they whisper in the shadows. So he agrees with Antigone. The people do support Antigone. They're just afraid to say so because they live under a tyranny. Haman counsels moderation to his father. He's desperate for Creon to compromise and recognize that he could be mistaken. He says at line 783, I think this is a very important section of Haman's speech, both in terms of the politics of this play and the characterization that is evidenced in this play. So picking it up at line 783, whoever thinks that he alone is wise, that he's got a superior tongue and brain, open him up and you'll find him a blank. It's shameful, it's never shameful for even a wise man to keep on learning new things all his life. Be flexible, not rigid, he begs his father. And now picking it up a few lines later, 798 to 800. Yes, it would be better if men were born with perfect understanding, but things don't work that way. The best response to worthy advice is to learn from it. So in this speech and in the dialogue that continues between father and son, Haman presents a democratic vision of political leadership, the opposite of his father's authoritarianism. And I think this is made even more clear at line 814, when Creon sarcastically asks his son, should I yield to them or rule Thebes myself? Haman is quick to respond, it's not a city if one man owns it. Now, that is the Democrats' point of view. It's not a city if one man owns it. At this point in the story, we may have hope that Haman will talk his father Creon out of executing Antigone. But Creon, at least for now, will not relent. And we once again see in his exchanges with his son, Creon's hatred of women. Line 752. To make sure we enforce discipline, never let a woman overwhelm a king. Better to be driven from power, if it comes to that, by a man, then nobody can say you were beaten by some female. So he condemns his son Haman on the grounds that Haman, according to Creon, has been effeminized. Creon says with disgust, line 824, look at yourself, a woman overpowers you. We also witness in this episode Creon's cruelty and vindictiveness. Line 839, he orders, bring out the odious creature, Antigone. Let her die at once in his presence. Let him watch this bridegroom as she's killed beside him. A few lines later, we learn that Antigone's punishment will not be a public stoning, which is bad enough. Her punishment will be worse. This is at line 853, and once again, it's Creon speaking. I will lead her along a deserted road and hide her alive in a hollow cave. I'll leave her just enough food to evade defilement so the city won't be infected. She can pray there to Hades, the one god whom she respects. Maybe he will spare her, though she's more likely to learn in her last hours that she's thrown her life away on the dead. Lines 853 to 860. So Creon wants to humiliate Antigone. He wants to degrade Antigone. Above all else, he wants to prove himself right. So Creon initially says in episode number 2, when we first see him in this play, he says he is only enforcing the law equally. But I think in episodes 3 and definitely in episode 4, it becomes clear that Creon is using state power to destroy Antigone. Haman says to his father, what I attack is your abuse of power. And so here I'm going against Hegel's reading of the play. I'll let you decide which reading you find most persuasive. But I think that when we reach the middle part of this play, it's not about two people, both of whom are equally right and both of whom are doing their duty, It's about, to quote the words of Haman, abuse of power by a tyrant who is not enforcing the laws equally as he claims. Well, episode number 5, lines 881 to 1035, presents the final confrontation between Creon and Antigone. So let's turn to that now, line 881, with the episode ending at line 1035. Antigone is brought from the palace. The stage direction tells us she's dressed in purple as a bride, 881. And so you've got to picture this. The actor portraying the role of Antigone back in 441 BCE would be walking out of the skiing door, right? She walks out into the orchestra, comes face to face with the actor portraying her uncle Creon. Antigone, she now knows, will be enclosed in a rock tomb, and thus her brother is dead but not buried, while Antigone will be buried without being dead. And it's at this point in the story that Antigone's human side emerges. She thinks about all the things that she'll miss out on. She'll miss out on marriage. She'll miss out on children. You've got to remember, Antigone is only a teenager. She began life as the daughter to a beloved and heroic king, King Oedipus, and she had every reason to expect that life would only get better. Now she's given up everything. She's given up everything in the name of her devotion to her family and to her religious principles. So let's turn to her speech in this episode, her lengthy speech that begins at line 887. So this is page 162, and Antigone speaking at line 887. And she says to the leader of the chorus who engages her in dialogue as this episode begins, "Citizens of our fatherland, you see me begin my last journey. I take one last look at sunlight that I'll never see again. Hades, who chills each one of us to sleep, will guide me down to Acheron's shore. I'll go hearing no wedding hymn to carry me to my bridal chamber, or songs girls sing when flowers crown a bride's hair. I'm going to marry the river of pain." And the chorus leader replies, "Don't praise and glory go with you to keep the deep caverns of the dead? You haven't been wasted by disease. You've helped no sword earn its keep. No, you've chosen of your own free will to enter Hades while you're still alive. No one else has ever done that." See, now the chorus, you get the sense, is moving slowly but surely to the side of Antigone. But this is such a powerful statement. "I'll go to my death hearing no wedding hymn to carry me to my bridal chamber, or songs girls sing when flowers crown a bride's hair. I'm going to marry the river of pain." And as this exchange continues between Antigone and the chorus, she comes to believe that she's being mocked by the chorus. I'm not sure if that is the case, but that's how Antigone perceives the chorus's words. So let's just move ahead to the next page, and this is line 920, and Antigone's next lengthy speech. She says, "No, I'm being laughed at. In the name of our fathers' gods, wait till I'm gone. Don't mock me while I stand here in plain sight, all you rich citizens of the town. At least I can trust you, headwaters of the river Dirky, and you, holy plains around Thebes, home of our great chariot fleet, to bear me witness. Watch them, march me off to my strange tomb, my heaped-up rock-bound prison, without a friend to mourn me, or any law to protect me, a miserable woman with no home here on earth, and none down with the dead, not quite alive, not yet a corpse." Lines 920 to 938. Well, some commentators analyzing this particular episode, episode 5, have argued that Antigone is engaging in self-pity here. I don't think so. I think what's really going on at this moment in the play is that she's acting as her own chorus. Because at least from her point of view, the Theban chorus is still unsympathetic to her. And indeed, at line 960, the chorus points out, it was your hot-headed willfulness that destroyed you. So it's not that Antigone is engaging in self-pity here. It's that she's expressing her anger, her righteous anger. She doesn't want to die, and she doesn't think she should have to die for what she's done. Picking it up again at line 1010. I think these are among the most powerful and poignant words spoken by this character in the entire play. Lines 1010 to 1022. Antigone. I won't hear bridal songs or feel the joy of married love, and will have no share in raising children. No, I will go grieving, friendless and alive, to a hollow tomb. Tell me, God. So she's been addressing the chorus, and then she addressed through what is called apostrophe, the land of Thebes, the river that runs through Thebes, the plains just outside the walls of Thebes. Here she actually addresses the gods. Tell me, gods, which of your laws did I break? I'm too far gone to expect your help. But whose strength can I count on when acts of blessing are considered blasphemy? If the gods are happy I'm sentenced to die, I hope one day I'll discover what divine law I've broken. But if judges are at fault, I want them to suffer the pain they inflict on me now. 1010 to 1022. So her actions have been done in the name of religious principle. And as she puts it in her very final line in the play, her actions have been done keeping faith. Line 1035. But now, in this speech that I've just quoted, this very powerful speech, she is wondering if the gods have abandoned her. How could they allow this to happen? Right? How could they allow her to face this terrible punishment, being entombed alive? In many ways, this moment in the play is her most tragic moment. It's still notable, however, that she doesn't ask for mercy, and she still retains her conviction that what she has done is the right thing. Juliette Binoche, who is the great actress in cinema and on stage, she's won an Academy Award, she played Antigone in 2015, a very highly regarded and popular stage version of Antigone that played in New York and then toured in a number of spots. In an interview, Binoche said the following. She said of this character Antigone, to whom she gave life in this stage production from 2015. This is Binoche. At the beginning, she, Antigone's, one whole being full of, yes, that's what I need to do, and nothing's going to stop me. But after she buries her brother and she's been seeing Creon, she has these doubts. And that is for me the human side, and so beautiful. Because there's a warrior in her, but she's really innocent as well. I'm not even alive, and I'm not yet dead. I'm in between those two worlds. She doesn't know where she is yet. That, I think, is a spot-on and eloquently stated interpretation of this character in Antigone in her final scene in the play. Well, let's then turn to episode 6. And now, in episode 6, lines 1090 to 1234, followed by a stacemon, which runs from 1235 to 1281, we once again become reacquainted with Tiresias. Tiresias, remember, who had that key scene in Oedipus the King when he revealed through riddles the truth of Oedipus's parentage. Tiresias arrives on the scene once again, the prophet seer. He enters the play in episode 6. And his message to Creon is clear. This is at line 1137. Respect the dead. Don't spear the fallen. How much courage does it take to kill a dead man? What a line. How much courage does it take to kill a dead man? And then, as Tiresias is wont to do, he offers a prophecy. This is at line 1176. So just move ahead to line 1176. He says to Creon, "You will not live for many circuits of the chariot's sun before you trade a child born from your loins for all the corpses whose deaths you have caused. You have thrown children from the sunlight down to the shades of Hades, ruthlessly housing a living person in a tomb, while you detain here among us something that belongs to the gods who live below our world, the naked, unwept corpse you've robbed of the solemn grieving we owe our dead." Lines 1176 to 1186, the words of Tiresias the prophet. At first, Creon, like Oedipus before him, rejects the prophecy of Tiresias. He rejects the advice of Tiresias. He accuses the prophet of taking bribes and of abusing a king in power. That's line 1169. And here, when he scolds Tiresias, I think there's a veiled threat that Tiresias will suffer for his defiance to the king. However, after Tiresias's prophecy, Creon admits that he is unnerved, and he asks the advice of the chorus. So this is another moment in Greek tragedy when the individual character, the protagonist, or in this case the antagonist, standing on stage, engages in a dialogue with the chorus, representing the collective, representing the community. He asks the advice of the chorus, and the chorus says at line 1222, "The gods act quickly to abort human folly." As a result, Creon finally relents. Line 1223, "I'll give up the convictions I hold passionately and do what you ask. We can't fight the raw power of destiny." Creon knows what happens from the story of Oedipus. He knows what happens when you ignore Tiresias, the prophet of the gods. And so Creon decides he will bury the body of Polynices. He will free Antigone from her entombment, and all will be well. Well, that takes us to the final episode of this play, episode 7, lines 1282 to 1511. And in the final episode of the play, we find out that Creon acted too late. He acted too late to correct his folly. The unnamed messenger in this scene has the majority of lines. In his first speech, before he details what has happened since the last episode, he reflects on Creon's life, and in doing so sums up what is arguably one of the main points of this play and one of the main points of Greek tragedy as a whole. This is at line 1289 to line 1302. The messenger speaking. "Creon always seemed someone to envy, to me at least. He saved the city from attack, the homeland where we sons of Candos live," Candos, the mythical founder of Thebes. "This won him, Creon, absolute power. He was the brilliant father of patrician children. Now it has all slipped away, for when things that give pleasure and meaning to our lives desert a man, he's not a human being anymore. He becomes a breathing corpse. Amass wealth if you can. Show off your house. Display the panache, the flamboyant manner of a great monarch. But if joy disappears from your life, I wouldn't give the shadow cast by smoke for all you possess. Only happiness matters." What a powerful speech. And then, starting at line 1322, he explains in vivid language how Creon has become what he calls a breathing corpse. Let's turn to line 1322 in the final episode, episode 6 of Antigone. And this is the messenger speaking to Eurydice, who is introduced for the first time in this play in the final episode. Eurydice is the wife of Creon and the mother of Haman. And these are the words of the messenger. "Oh, my dear queen, I will spare you nothing. I'll tell you truthfully. what I've just seen. Why should I say something to soothe you that will later prove me a liar? Straight talk is always best. I traveled with your husband to the far edge of the plain where Polyneices' corpse mangled by wild dogs lay still uncared for. We prayed for mercy to the goddess of the roadways and to Pluto, asking them to restrain their anger. We washed his remains with purified water, used boughs stripped from nearby bushes. We burned what was left, then mounded a tomb from his native earth. After that, we turned toward the girl's deadly wedding cavern, with its bed of cold stone. Still far off, we heard an enormous wail coming from somewhere near the unhallowed portico, so we turned back to tell Creon. As the king arrived, these incoherent, despairing shouts echoed all around him. First he groaned, then he yelled out in raw pain, "Am I a prophet? Will my worst fears come true? Am I walking down the bitterest street of my life? That's my son's voice greeting me. More quickly, men, run through that narrow gap where the stones have been pulled loose from the wall. Go where the cavern opens out. Tell me the truth. Is that Haman's voice I'm hearing, or have the gods played some trick on my ears?" Following orders from our despondent master, we stared in. At the tomb's far end, there she was, hanging by the neck, a noose of finely woven linen holding her aloft. He fell against her, arms hugging her waist, grieving for the bride he'd lost to Hades, for his father's axe, for his own doomed love. When Creon saw all this, he stepped inside, groaned horribly, and called out to his son, "My desperate child, what have you done? What do you think you are doing? When did the gods destroy your reason? Come out of there, son, I beg you." His son then glared straight at him with savage eyes, spat in his face, spoke not one word in answer, but drew his two-edged sword. His father leapt back. Haman missed his thrust. Then this raging youth, with no warning, turned on himself, tensed his body to the sword, and drove half its length deep into his side. Still conscious, he clung to her with limp arms, gasping for breath, spurts of his blood pulsing onto her white cheek. Then he lay there, his dead body embracing hers, married at last, poor man, not up here, but somewhere in Hades, proving that of all mankind's evils, thoughtless violence is the worst. So, before Creon could free Antigone, she killed herself. And it turned out that someone did truly love Antigone, and that was Haman. And Haman realized that he couldn't live without her, so he killed himself as well. Well, at line 1418, the messenger brings more news. And this happens when he re-enters the stage and addresses Creon. Creon's wife, Eurydice, has killed herself as well. She's killed herself after learning of her son's death. The messenger says to Creon, line 1456, "With her last breath, she cursed you, Creon, killer of your own son." Creon's response to his calamities is unforgettable. This is at line 1472. "There's no one to blame, no other mortal. I am the only one." He looks to the dead body of his son Haman. "I killed you, that's the reality. Men, take me inside. I'm less than nothing now." So Creon is utterly defeated. Line 1504. Again, the words of Creon. "I don't know where to rest my eyes, or on whose shoulders I can lean my weight. My hands warp all they touch." The chorus's final stasimon, the final stasimon of this play, addresses Creon's narrative arc as it has unfolded before us in the 6 episodes that make up Sophocles' play. The chorus says, this is 1512 to 1518, "Good sense is crucial to human happiness. never fail to respect the gods, for the huge claims of proud men are always hugely punished by blows that, as the proud grow old, pound wisdom through their minds. The final statement of Sophocles' Antigone. So arguably, though she has lost her life, Antigone wins in the end. And that, I think, leads the playgoer, the reader, the critical interpreter of this play to ask some questions about Sophocles' attitude towards Antigone and the larger implications of his attitude. The argument could be made that by portraying Antigone in such a positive light, Sophocles may be challenging Greek conceptions of the proper role of women. So in that sense, one could say Sophocles is something of a radical, right? By presenting Antigone as this heroic figure, as presenting her as a greater person than her antagonist, Creon. Sophocles thus challenges cultural assumptions. At the same time, you could argue that Sophocles is a conservative, because even while he is challenging cultural assumptions about the role of women in his society, he is affirming the importance of respecting the gods. So you can look at this play from many different perspectives. On the one hand, it is the story of a family. It's a family tragedy. It is a work about politics, tyranny versus democracy. The big question as to whether should you follow the law, even if you believe that law is unjust. I think too it's a religious play, because we come back to one of the favorite themes of Sophocles that we saw in Oedipus the King. Favorite messages of Sophocles: one must respect the gods. Creon does not respect the gods, and Creon pays in the end. So before I end this lecture, I want to turn to three more quotations about this play. And there are quotations taken from different eras, from presenting very different points of view. And the first quotation is again from Hegel, from George Frederick Hegel. He had written midway through his career this very influential piece on Antigone that I outlined earlier in today's lecture. Towards the end of his life, he returned to Antigone again. It seemed as though he was almost obsessed with this play and this character, and it helped shape his own philosophical system in many respects. And here's the quote from Hegel towards the end of his life. He says, "Of all the splendors of the ancient and the modern world, the preeminent, the most satisfying work of art is Antigone by Sophocles." Now, moving ahead over a century to Virginia Woolf. I'm sure most of you know who Virginia Woolf is. She was the great novelist from Britain in the first 4 decades of the 20th century. She wrote To the Lighthouse, Mrs. Dalloway, A Room of One's Own. And she, in a letter, wrote the following about Antigone. She says, "I shall never forget the Antigone. I saw it at Cambridge years ago, and it's haunted me ever since. Don't you think it's quite the most modern thing you ever saw?" These are the words of Virginia Woolf. And I think it's certainly the case that this play, as it continues to be performed, and new playgoers, new generations rediscover it, they find something that is current in this play, both in its treatment of politics, this ideological debate, in its treatment of gender, and in the characters, the characters that are drawn so superbly, that seem so multi-dimensional. Well, the last quote comes from Will Aiken. Will Aiken in 2018 wrote a fine book called Antigone Undone, where he covers, explains, and collects interviews from a number of the 21st century productions of Sophocles' play. And this is what Will Aiken writes. But we are left at last with this young girl who may or may not have existed, who speaks to us from within and beyond her tomb, entering our current discourse on family, gender, and state, and challenging it at every turn. We are with her then. She is with us now. Creon tried to have her killed, and that too she defeated him, choosing to kill herself. She's dead and has been for a very long time. She may never have been real, and yet, as French psychoanalytic theorist Jacques Derrida has pointed out, we have been fascinated by Antigone, by that immense, impossible desire which could not live, but was capable of overthrowing, of paralyzing, or surpassing a system and a history. Those are the words of Will Aiken, within which he quotes the words of the great Jacques Derrida. And I think I will give them the last word on this magnificent play, other than to point out that in my view, Oedipus the King, that is Sophocles' most famous play. It is, in a sense, the purest tragedy, as Aristotle recognizes. It has all of these elements that are found in almost all tragic plays. But Antigone is Sophocles' best play. Well, the next play we're going to be looking at is not a tragedy, but a comedy, and that is Lysistrata by Aristophanes. So in the next week, I hope that you find the page number in our Norton Anthology of Drama and start reading that play. There are some very dense passages, as in Aeschylus, but in the end, the play is very rewarding. I would argue that Aristophanes is the very best comic satirist who ever wrote plays. So I will leave it there.